Today is Monday, January 13th, 2025. Recorded on this date is the Microsoft Security Insight Show podcast experience.
So if we were doing casting, I'd tell you to come back for a second. That was pretty good. I like that, Brody. That was awesome. Appreciate that. So here we are. Once again, Edward is not with us this evening. So obviously, everything's on the table. We can talk about Edward as much as we want, but let's not start there. Let's just go around the horn as we normally do. Let's start with Ray. I'm more interested in her tagline this evening as chaotic runtime. I'm sure that has something to do with what she's about ready to tell us. So
no, just like my life. No, let's see, nonstop action. I completed my basic course load for my master's in cyber operations, and now I'm in the capstone. So I need to focus on a project, and I've been thinking about phishing, and specifically phishing on social apps. So if anybody has any ideas, wants to contribute to that mind share, you reach out to me. I love to collaborate there. And then for work, designing some POCs or some trial experiences for a couple of customers. And that's really exciting because, again, I get to work more directly with like the Defender experts, the day-to-day, and lead feature product managers. And then obviously partner ecosystem, working on building out the webinar. And we have an internal summit this week, so I get to talk about Defender experts to our folks on the inside and give them a little bit of an inside scoop. So it's been a nonstop whirlwind, but all good for a Monday. That's it. That's it for me on this great Monday.
So I don't think that's it. I had a question about your phishing on social apps. How could people get hold of you other than, is it LinkedIn? Do you have like a GitHub repo that you're...
I was going to give Tommy two-tone 86753. But let's see. I probably LinkedIn would be the best way, the best vector of attack for me. So if you just
LinkedIn's usually always kind of the best thing for me too, because I don't really ghost anyone on LinkedIn. Usually I do respond, but at the same time, it gives you an opportunity to, LinkedIn's like any other social app. People are phishing, right? They'll send you in-mails and stuff like that to try to get you to click on something or I've had emails or in-mails in LinkedIn where people, hey, let's get on a call. Let's talk about this thing. And I'm like, I'm just like, you got to be super careful about all that stuff. So.
Good point.
You do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ray. I'm super impressed that you're done with your schooling and stuff.
Well, I'm not officially, I have to get this capstone project. So, okay. Fleshed out. All right. Got to complete that.
Yeah.
But I was just curious, when you do get those emails, do you respond? Is it like a sternly worded letter, or like, you won't get me?
Well, what I've noticed, and maybe you can add this to your project, there's some direct feedback. I have noticed that if they're not serious or they're literally phishing for either information, contact info, or whatever it is they're looking for, if you ignore them up to about the third post, they go away. They literally do on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's really good about that. Now, as far as some of the other social apps, I think those are a little different because people have that capability to reach out. But it's like any, to me, it's like any social app. Everybody complains about X because Elon owns it or because there's such toxicity, but everything that you use takes effort to manage. And I think a lot of people leave a social app or a social network, not necessarily because it's toxic. It's only because their feed is, because they have participated there for years and years and years, and they followed so many people and they've kind of let it go just unbounded, and then their feed become toxic and they don't realize that they literally just need to cut people out of their lives, right? To put their feed back to where it's manageable. I do that all the time. People may get offended, but
it's for me.
If somebody says something,
you're curating.
Curating.
Yes.
Culling. Yeah. Yeah. Curating.
This is not the Hunger Games. This is
It is. It is. You are in control. So yeah, I just put.
It's ridiculous though. I have an app restriction for Instagram, for example, for 20 minutes a day because I don't want to be on any more than
that's
that.
good.
Okay. And all of a sudden I'll be like, guys fix things Instagram page.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Look, here's a guy using a hammer in this unique way I've never seen before. And then next week it's an ad for OnlyFans because they just did that.
Bait and
They targeted and they did the bait and switch. Right. And so it's like, even if you curate or cull your list, it's sometimes difficult because accounts can go into bad states
I
or
will
intentionally
agree.
made to be bad
Yeah.
states. But yes. Yeah.
I will agree with things like Instagram. What else? What Threads is one of those. Instagram definitely. Maybe it's just all the things owned by Meta. I'm not sure, but yeah, they stick things in your feed that you literally did not ask for, right? And yeah, and it's like the ads or the organization like Meta. They're doing that to try to get you to engage more. They want you on there more minutes, right? They want your eyeballs. So they do things. And I think at that point, it's just like, oh my goodness, you just need to stop using Meta products.
Oh, but X doesn't do that?
No.
Oh, okay. It's really a reflection.
And maybe it's the interface that I use because I use TweetDeck. So maybe that's a little bit more manageable. I'm not sure. That's something
we should do an investigation.
Well, that should be part of your project.
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. What else is going on, Brody? What have you done since we talked last?
Worked my tail off. I'm trying to get this. I'm working with a government customer, so that they can report on their compliance against various infrastructure controls using Azure Policy. And the built-in defender for cloud reporting could be better. Just watch my words there. And there is a Power BI available community report mechanism that I'm trying to get going for them. But that team may no longer have the funding to update said reporting capability because all funding now has to be tied to AI somehow. It sounds like internally.
Oh, wow.
You're gonna get internal hours to work on internal things. So I might have to go back and find a new solution. So I'm just kind of like trying to get this going over the last few days and get it deployed so I can demo it. But now we're running into like, oh, this might need to be updated, and the people who are updating it won't work on it unless they're being compensated to do so, which is fair. So that's kind of like a hang up that I'm working on right now. And then
that's interesting too, because I wonder how many companies are doing that, reallocating budget or resources behind this, fancy new AI thing versus, some of those old projects.
Good point. And it's fair. I mean, you got to allocate resources.
Yeah, you do.
Outside of Power BI, I'd like to find maybe if there's a way in Log Analytics workspaces. I think I've got a colleague who's working on something similar. I think he's using Log Analytics workspaces to create a similar kind of dashboard. And so I might have to go down that route and explore that. I just had experience with the Power BI option. So that's mostly been my battle. And then I'm working with another customer on developing their security controls framework for all of the different like zero trust domains. So today we talked about data privacy and logging and monitoring and incident response. And they're really fun to work with. They're chill. Midwest company, a global presence, but everybody's hilarious and they laugh at my jokes. And so that makes for a great customer engagement when you get along with the people you're working for. It's not always that way, but I seem to luck out more often than not these days. Yeah. And other than that, we got back to community updates. It was our January security community update at Microsoft, and that went great. It's good to have everybody back in the fold and updating the community on news, events, solutions, you name it. And we also had internally a presentation from a company called BlinkOps, which does vendor agnostic automation capabilities. They're a Microsoft Pegasus / Microsoft for Startups organization. And they have a really compelling solution. And it was great for them to be able to demo and trial that internally to our teams. So maybe I can ask some of these startups teams if they wanted to present on our show to a more external audience. That might be an idea to for future episodes. So yeah. I think that's it. That's everything I'm doing. Oh, one more thing.
Yes.
As part of that reporting, I had to give an app registration owner permissions. And the second you do that, I have now learned about the reach of the Secure Future initiative internally at Microsoft, because
There you go.
you give anything, any type of permission that is, elevated. There is going to be a lot of emails and communications coming your way to ensure that you are in compliance.
Yeah.
And it's a thing. We'll just put it that way. So I'm happy that it's happening. And I'm happy that I see the effort in going into the right direction. But I'm also like, oh man, on top of just trying to get this to work, I now have to make sure it's also compliant. Okay, it's fun. It's good times. So yeah, I
had something very similar recently with our group's MSI show internal team thing. I got an email straight after saying, hey, our compliance here is that you have more than one owner on a group or more than one owner on a distribution list. And I had you all as owners as well, so that it was in compliance and we didn't lose communication ability. So
now we're all compliant.
Wonderful. We are. I did the work. So hey, we do have a guest, but I wanted to. I think there's some things I think our audience would be interested in. I'm going to put these in the show notes as well, so they can go out and actually take a look at this as well. 3 things I wanted to talk about. Let's see how this works here. First thing we released today. Can you see that? What's it say?
Lessons from Red Teaming 100 Generative AI Products.
It is working.
Authored by Microsoft AI Red Team.
So this is brand new. This is a white paper that we just released today, and I'll put the link in the show notes so everybody can get a copy of this. But yes, this is our white paper on red teaming, the things that we have done at Microsoft from a red team perspective on 100 generative AI products. So you can get an understanding, go through and look at the specific generative AI products to determine where they are potentially vulnerable. And also not just the vulnerability, but also understand what those vulnerabilities look like. And maybe as you are developing your own applications, your own generative AI based applications, where to kind of put the effort around securing those. So this is actually pretty cool. It's a pretty long thing. It's a pretty neat report. I read through not all of it, but most of it. But guess what? Copilot actually will give you a summary, just like anything else. The second thing,
that's very cool.
Gary is with us in the audience today, and he posted this today, kind of an update on the REST APIs and MS Graph with Microsoft Sentinel. I thought this was actually really good. Gary he's been on top of all of this REST API stuff for as long as I've known him. So he does have kind of an update. I'll also put this in the show notes so people that are interested in that will be able to take a look. The last thing before I bring our guest on, hey, I started another sub podcast for my primary main personal podcast, which is after the blog thing, right? This one's called Monday Minutes, and it's literally just a what would you call it? It's the oddities of security. So there's a lot of weird things that happen in security that is just not normal, and those kind of get overlooked because they seem silly or what have you. And I found a lot of those, so I'm going to start reporting on those like every Monday to make security a little bit more fun. But at the same time, these things, you absolutely do not need to pass over these things because they can have impact and significance in your environment, even though sometimes they seem silly. So I'm going to start covering those every Monday. This is just, you can find it out on Spotify or wherever you just find me. So that's it.
Nice.
It's amazing. Yeah. How do you find the time, Rob? Like you just you must have 7 hours in a day. It's so impressive.
37. Man, I'm gonna have to get the calculator out now. I think it's 37 and a half.
Like literally this weekend, I'm building a baby gate, and then I have to run to help with a diaper incident. And Rod's posted yet another Twitter thing. And it's just like, okay, all right, yeah.
an entire like series incubation. He's like, no big deal. Plus these 5 other books that I just created and also am publishing and doing my marketing tour for. Like, what are you guys up to? My therapy appointment. Like, okay, like you.
It is kind of therapeutic.
An hour and cried. Yeah.
I maybe that's something I could do. I could start selling my time to other people. Hey, would you like 2 hours left, in the day? Here, I'll sell you some of mine.
I have a feeling you're
probably
doing
good.
that already, but okay. Yeah.
Very good business. Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have a good guest, by the way. This individual, first time I saw him, as part of the show was during our holiday episode. If people missed that, I'm like, come on. It was great, but we didn't get to focus. And there was so much there that I wanted to know more about. So I'm so happy that Ray invited our good buddy, my new best friend, Miguel.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Although I feel bad that I got to correct the host. The holiday episode was our second time.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Well, this is Rob's attempt at disinformation because we were talking about X and Meta. He was like, "Am I going to get fact checked here?" So yes, thank you, Miguel, for fact checking us, and thank you, Rod, for putting that in place.
36 seconds in, and I'm already being fact checked and playing into conspiracy theory.
Fantastic. I'm going to rely on community notes for that one.
Probably best.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, you're right. You were here for that's why. For the armor defense thing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure, I was. And now I'm an independent contractor.
That's right. That's what threw me.
Getting to talk about security. I mean,
for
so for the guests, some of you have no idea who I am. My name is Miguel Clarke. I'm a retired FBI agent. I did 23 and a half years with the FBI. I worked violent crimes, which every FBI agent wants to work violent crimes, right? Well, in 1998, when I graduated from the FBI Academy, every agent wanted to work violent crimes. It's the fun things, you jump out of moving vehicles, put people in jail, bank robberies, gangs, drugs, all of that stuff. Got to do some of that. Worked a little bit terrorism, worked on September 11th investigation as well. And then in around 2003, 2004, I started working exclusively national security computer intrusions. So for me, I've been looking at cybersecurity since approximately the year 2000 and going forward. And so I really get an opportunity to talk about some of the lessons learned from being in the FBI, going to the FBI Academy, going from being a citizen to becoming an agent of the government who has arrest powers. And that transition brings really kind of an interesting way of looking at life. And not everybody kind of buys off on those things. So it's different. Oh, Texas. Cool. Texas chapter.
Shout out to Texas. Yeah, comment in the audience. I've seen Miguel talk in relation to InfraGard talks. You know what? I am also part of the Cincinnati chapter of InfraGard.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So
not that I ever participate. I
started with InfraGard in, I think, August of 2000. So it was right at the early part of that, and I've had an opportunity to kind of see how InfraGard has grown over time. And,
my goodness.
The challenges that have been associated with the information sharing. A lot of the stuff that we do now, there was nobody doing that, right? There was no. Think of insert any incident response, large incident response cybersecurity company. For the most part, they weren't really there in 2000. I don't want to get myself in any trouble in my first 2 minutes here. So a lot of that work was being done by FBI agents and also Secret Service. So we were hands-on the computers, doing incident response, doing the forensics. And so you didn't really have a company to call in 2001 and 2002 if you needed forensics, right? You might find a guy somewhere that could do it. So that's where I really cut my teeth, is just looking at that information hands-on. And in the FBI, we called them victims. So responding to events and really kind of talking to victims. And from that, I kind of got an idea as to what makes a computer intrusion really bad versus the computer intrusions that happen and people recover. And so now I really have an opportunity to talk about that unencumbered and really kind of separated from a product sense. So, if there are questions, hopefully we'll have enough time during the podcast to get to all of those. So that's just a little 2-minute background on me and where I came from and what got me into cyber.
Very cool.
That's
Very cool background.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You talked about the violent crimes. I would absolutely not want to do the violent crimes. That to me sounds like a CSI episode, and I'll like turn my head every 5 minutes. But is that just? I'm sorry, that stuff grosses me out.
No, well, okay.
Yeah.
For us, most of what the FBI agents are doing, they're making the case. And then when you make that case, you go and you do like the search warrant and the arrest warrant. And so for most of us in the FBI at that time, that was the thing that got your blood pumping and got you like, hey, you really feel like you're alive because, hey, you knock down a door and right, everybody come out. It's usually very dark in the morning. And Americans would be surprised how many people sleep clothing optional, I'll just say. And I've seen more than that I needed to see in my lifetime. Right. So, it's like, okay, put on some pants and come to the door. Yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe it's just me, my personality. I'm always trying to be prepared. So I sleep with clothes on and my shoes are like right next to the bed in case there's a noise or there's something. I'm always like, prepared to.
You stay
not
ready.
That I wear.
Get ready. So that's.
I'm always ready.
Yeah.
I think more people should be like that. But
what is your defense weapon of choice, Rod?
Yeah,
my defense weapon of choice. So I do have a shotgun.
Okay. I thought you were going to say razor sharp wit.
Well, the wife doesn't like that. I keep it under the bed and I keep it apart, but I can put that thing together in like no time at all.
Oh yeah, no big deal.
What about
you thought I was going to say like samurai sword or something, probably, but
my
and then Brody, you're going to be next.
I feel like blades are. I don't. That's more my comfort level. But that sounds creepier, right? But I'm not saying it's a broadsword. Okay, I'm not saying it's a scimitar. Certainly not a rapier. It's just who role played. I did. So,
yeah. And it depends on which movie you watched recently. It could have been Three Musketeers, and you're ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Takes all kinds.
Ray has a wall of swords, is what I learned today. Okay. Yeah. Depends who's attacking her. Whether it be medieval.
Switchblade. I just saw West Side Story, right? Like you have to. I like to just stay ready and versatile.
Please don't burst into Maria.
It's fine. It's all good. That's for later. That's for the after show.
Nice.
Miguel, something that I was thinking while you talked about the FBI had that guy. It's like the nerd, the sneakers. I don't know if you ever watched that movie Sneakers, which I thought was awesome.
I did, yes.
Yeah. But they had that guy. There was always one guy designated to be the nerd, right? Even I think NCIS still does that TV show.
Yes.
But has the FBI's hiring practices changed because cyber and because security is more prominent these days, you think?
It has. There's more, because it's more mainstream, more people are, I think, conversant from a cyber perspective. And the FBI always has a mindset that any FBI agent can do any task. Right. That is special agents are fungible. Right. And if the one that you pulled off the shelf isn't working, go grab another one like a marker. Right. And so the FBI way has always been for solving problems is we continue to pour FBI agents on the problem until the problem goes away. And that's typically the way we solve it. Like, September 11th, we're like, we need more FBI agents working this. And so you continue applying FBI agents until your problem until the problem goes away. And
so it's less about skill set and retraining. It's more or less, let's just keep putting people in there until we find the right one.
Well, effectively, yes, because the academy gives people the basic level of skills that they need. Okay. Right. And so your idea, you become an investigator and you become an expert investigator. And then you kind of move also from, being a citizen to being law enforcement. And so what that means is that you now have the power to make people do things that they might not necessarily want to do. right? You have the authority to do that. You have the power to do that. And so you apply that power using only as much as you need in order to accomplish a task and never more than you actually need. And by doing that, you can create different types of outcomes. So that when you do that, it's problems have a way of going away when you apply enough good people to the problem. I think that's been true for many years.
Or sometimes the problem resolves itself and you feel like you've done the due diligence. You threw everything at it and it seemed like it worked. And so we'll do that next time. And next time it doesn't work the same. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
We missed Brody talking about his defense weapon of choice, though.
I don't know if I'm allowed as a Canadian to talk about weapons I may have on hand.
Well, you're the 51st state now. You can legally own a gun now.
Not till next week.
Oh, right. Next week.
I may need to use my defense weapon against some colleagues on the show, it sounds like, soon. So we'll see what happens there.
Sorry, Brody.
Dance off? Like you got sharp moves? Is that what it is? Like
I definitely do not have sharp moves. I'll tell you that much. Do not have sharp moves. I have a firearms acquisition license, and I'm just going to leave it there. Yeah.
What is that? Like, is it a bazooka? Like, you can't just, like, you made it creepy by you're like, maybe. And I don't know. Here's more cryptic, like, gesturing.
I honestly don't know what the rules are if I'm allowed on the internet to say that I have weapon in the house and what I would do if somebody walked in this. I just don't want to get arrested. I don't know.
What?
That's fair. Yeah,
I don't know. Well, it's more it's different than America, right? Like
it is.
Yeah. So it's
absolutely.
like handguns are like you cannot even you could have. Yep. It's a very long story. The difference in firearms between the U.S. and Canada.
But
I know someone that was locked up for a pea shooter. Yeah.
Wow. What? All right, I'll you can tag me in, Brody. I'll be happy to answer the question. First line of defense starts with a 7-year-old Rottweiler who is super sweet but doesn't sound very sweet. And then that holds off the threat for the first few minutes so that I can get to a 9mm pistol with hollow point rounds. And you use the hollow point rounds and the pistol to fight your way to the rifle, which isn't that far away from the pistol, by the way. And then the rifle is on, and I think I have 16 or 17 magazines of ammo ready to go just for the rifle, and probably 8 or 9 for the pistol. So... Yes.
Speaking of
ready
animals,
to rock and roll.
Speaking of animals as protection, I knew a guy that had a pit bull, nasty, mean pit bull. But as it was growing up, he would chase it around the house with just like a plastic cup, and it hated any cup like that. So you would go after it with a cup, and it would just leave you alone and go whimper somewhere. So somebody actually, it wasn't me, somebody actually robbed his house with a plastic cup.
See, that's an insider threat risk right there.
Yeah.
It is.
Somebody he knew, somebody he knew, right? Let's get our investigative hats on, and knew the weaknesses of his physical security and had
it definitely
insider
wasn't
knowledge.
God, because he said it wasn't him.
Well, yeah, they caught the guy. They caught the guy. The guy knew about it, right? Because he had visited there before.
Of course.
They
caught
caught
the house with a cup.
Still, I thought that was just like, what the? That was crazy.
Miguel, you're on my list of people's houses to go to when there's a zombie apocalypse.
Come on down, buddy.
All right, sweet.
Come on down.
You bring your armaments up to my mountains, and nobody can stop us, man.
Well, getting across the border might be 51st state, right? Forgot all about it. My apologies.
Just a dotted imaginary line, whatever, right? Yeah.
But culture.
Hey, Miguel, earlier,
this, right?
Earlier, you said there were no off the topic
Table,
questions that we could ask.
Yes.
Off table
yes.
questions.
Watch me readjust as I start to get myself comfortable.
Miguel,
I'm not nervous at all.
How? Okay, if it's anything you can't talk about, don't talk about it. But
Fair
how
enough.
does the FBI leverage vulnerabilities and known exploits in cyber security to investigate and track individuals for warrants, etc.?
Okay, so for the most part, if you're talking about vulnerabilities, if those vulnerabilities exist, then depending on how big the threat is and the subject, you might say it would be super. Well, okay, I'll tell you what I would say. If I were still in the FBI, what I would say would be like, it would be super convenient if the the update that you had planned for this Tuesday actually happen next Tuesday for that. It's not something that I can ask, right? Because you've got to do the best thing for your business every single time. But you know, if your pressure to fix this is less than my pressure to investigate it, or to go after this particular bad guy, then it would be super convenient, and your government would thank you for doing that particular thing, right?
Okay. Okay.
But as far as, you know, putting in vulnerabilities, you know, that would have to be a really pretty significant threat, if that makes a lot of sense, right? Like if it's, hey, you know, we're going after this ransomware gang, and you know they stole $10 or $15 million. I don't know that in 2024 parlance would be something that we would say, yeah, we need to go do that. But let's just say there was a particular world leader that was going to be traveling to some country, and this world leader has, started a war for 3 years, and it's costing people, like, it's going to cost $1 trillion once it's all said and done. And boy, we sure would like to know when he gets to the corner of that street corner of walk and don't walk, so that we can introduce him to his maker. And it sure would be wonderful if you could help us facilitate that introduction to his maker, reintroduction. If you just, like, this is a great time for you to take a bathroom break. And you might say, yeah, you know what? I have a friend of mine who's married to somebody from that part of the world, and it sure would be nice if this war would end. And this is a great time for me to go get some coffee that I'm going to brew myself, you know? And
I got
so
you.
something along those lines, right? But the juice has to be worth the squeeze is the bottom line, right? And I think the more comfortable we get with making exceptions to the rules that are put in place, just the worse that it is for everyone. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, amazing.
It does.
Yeah. Miguel, I just want you to, like, finesse everything. Just put it in, like, Miguel speak. There were just there's so many good lines there that I am now I'm going to find a reason to say, you know, the corner of walk and don't walk. Okay. That's my go-to line now. And then, but what about the FBI creating that entire phone company to kind of entrap criminals? Tell me more about that. Like, where were you?
Okay, so I don't have any information specifically on the phone company, but if I would see a very enterprising individual working with attorneys, because nobody gets to do anything without attorneys, right?
I would hope
at
so.
all. So and involving the attorneys in anything is kind of like being a kid and asking your parent to referee, right? You know, and in my house, that was a recipe for getting everybody spanked and or grounded. But you do definitely need to have, you know, the attorneys there to talk about the legality of what it is that you're going to do. And if there's a facility that's there and we know the bad guys have a problem, I think it's perfectly appropriate for the United States government to create a solution for that problem and then encourage bad guys to use that facility. Now, in 2024 going into 2025, I think people are taking data and information and jumping to conclusions before they have wisdom or real knowledge or wisdom, right? And the demand for wisdom and knowledge, like going that extra mile to figure out exactly what this means. And okay, this is what it sounds like, but is the actuality different from what it sounds like? Is it different than the soundbite? There's not very much demand for that anymore, right? I mean, you look at our entertainment and you look at really kind of like a TikTok type generation. If you can't get your point across in 2.5 minutes, right? I'm done with it. I've finished consuming it. It's the candy version of nutrition, right? Like it's a quick hit. It's going to eat it in a minute. It's going to hit your bloodstream right away. And then you're done with it, right? There is no real demand for like vegetables anymore, if you will, from that metaphor. So there's that. But I do want to double click back on the attorneys, right? The attorneys, they bless everything that in every operation they have attorney involvement. Now, one thing with that, there was a program that the FBI had written 20 years ago now, and it was the way it was a sniffer type program the FBI was using to look at, identify, feeds, network feeds, and pull out only the information that law enforcement was interested in, and really leave the other stuff that law enforcement wasn't interested in. And that level of being selective was different than being kind of like an omnivore, right? Where you just eat everything and anything. So we're like, oh yeah, you know what? We only want the meat, so we're going to pull out the meat. And so the FBI program was called Carnivore. Epic disaster of a name for a program, right? Like it evoked in people the mindset that the government was doing something tantamount to letting Godzilla run around through here and like terrorizing these innocent people with carnivores, right? It was just terrible. And so it just kind of goes to show that when you're in law enforcement, you tend to think about the world in a particular way, and really normal people, regular people, if you will, just don't see the world in that same way. And so I think that gap now is larger than it was when I was in the FBI. And I think that people are less concerned about kind of narrowing that gap, if that makes sense. So
that's
Ray,
that's super sad.
Yeah, no, I got nervous there because I was like, I responded well to Project Carnivore. I was like, okay, let's get in motion. Let's start rocking and rolling.
Yes.
So now again, I have more fodder for my future therapy appointments. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you.
Nah.
Oh, we're just getting started.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because you mentioned kind of the TikTok, the little snippets of information instead of like a full investigation. You almost like, I think people just kind of assume they're getting the full scope of that information in these little snippets, right? And I haven't thought about that since you said that, but that's, I think, literally how people consume their information these days, and where they kind of get these assumptions that things aren't necessarily the way they think they are, right? And that's not just FBI, that's across the spectrum for information in general, but I can see how that would really be harmful to federal investigations and stuff like that.
It's a huge problem because the FBI has always been, the mindset of the silent professional. And so we've always believed that the truth will bear this out. So the example that I've used in the past is the FBI, right? The world wants a news story, a podcast, something along those lines. Or a movie, and the FBI is interested in a documentary that takes 10 years to film. And we assume that you're going to wait for the documentary. And you're like, no, I just saw the podcast, right? I saw everything that I need to see. Right? It doesn't matter whether or not it's true, right? I just saw this thing. It's instant. I wanted to know what's going on in the world. And here's this guy who came on, he gave me his opinion. It's like, but the FBI wants you to wait for the documentary. We've interviewed all the people, right? We've gone into the detail, and really it's overcome by events. And so that mindset is the de facto mindset of the FBI. And what that means is that we're not going to comment on ongoing investigations, and we're not going to put the work that was done into a context when people want that context, right? You'll get it in the documentary. And I think that's really been harmful, that mindset that goes back to the early 1900s and the professionalism of the organization, where people used to wait to get their news, right? You used to wait. Oh, yeah, I gotta, I wait till tomorrow morning or next week for the newspaper. Or I'm going to wait till 5 p.m. to get the news. You want to know something, you can have the answer before I'm done asking the question, or at least an answer. And so that cultural difference between how the world works now, the FBI, I don't know that the FBI is prepared to close that gap. And I don't know if they even should close that gap, but it is a challenge. And I think we as, current FBI agents, former FBI agents, have to be prepared to address that gap in the things that we say and the way that we say them. And I don't know that we've done a very good job with that in years past, in recent years at least.
So as a retired FBI agent, do you still interact or engage with the FBI? Are you required to kind of do that, or kind of stay connected because you were part of that mechanism?
Required, no, but it is a privilege. There's a retired agents association that's there that is in routine communication with FBI leadership. So there's that. For me, I still consider myself to be a representative for the organization as well. And, to a certain degree, a standard bearer. right? Hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. And if I were to do anything, all right, let me take a step back. The number one rule for the FBI is don't embarrass the Bureau, right? And that's it. DEB, don't embarrass the Bureau. That's what they used to teach. It was a real thing. And I think for a lot of us as retired FBI agents, that's what we still remember. And we do see the responsibility. I think the responsibility goes away. You put people in jail, they may not be happy about it. The fact that you're retired, that doesn't go away. So for many FBI agents, they keep proficient with their firearms. And federal law does allow for retired FBI agents to still have some of the same rights that we did when we were working, but we're not agents anymore. We're retired. So the special part of it is gone, right? So there are no protections, there's no immunity, there's none of that. There's just the right to carry as a retired federal law enforcement officer.
Yeah. So what do you do now? I mean, obviously you took that skill set and you're probably doing something with it now, which that skill set would be super valuable. Someone has to be taking advantage of that. What are you doing now outside of retirement?
For now, I am really kind of independent on the consulting side. What's been my mission since retiring has been to really raise the awareness of what it takes to be, what does cybersecurity really mean? Like, I want to have meaningful discussions about that. And we talk about security as really kind of a noun, like a thing that you have, a thing that you can buy, a thing that you can sell, right? And, by definition, security is the absence of, or the freedom from the risk, right? And so when you say it out loud and you ask that question, you're like, oh, well, you know what? So we don't really have security, right? We have security tools, things that can be used to enhance a certain level of security. And now you're getting into not security as much as a thing that you can have, but as a discipline that you practice, right? And so then if you have to practice it, then there are security behaviors that have to go along with the security tools. And if you have behaviors, you also have mindset. So you have tools, mindset, and behaviors that are all kind of coming together. And there you get what you wouldn't think of. It's not security that you get resilience when you put those things all together.
Right. And a reduction in risk, ideally.
Well, it's a reduction in the risk that you experience. Right. So Ray likes the way that I kind of I try to be very precise and technical and tactical about the things that I say. It's because when an FBI agent says something, it becomes a thing. Right. And now it's like the whole government said it. So we we should be very precise in the things that we say. So when somebody says, hey, we mitigated that risk, I'm thinking the person whose hands were at that keyboard, they no longer have hands, they no longer have a keyboard, or they're no longer a person, right? Like they're now in the past tense. So you don't really, that's the way that you mitigate risk. The same way that you'd mitigate risk in war is that you remove that person's capability to actually to conduct war or to make violence or to make threats. And that's the only way for me to, when I say we're really reducing that risk. And we tend to talk about risk reduction in the terms of likelihood and never in the terms of magnitude, right? It's like, oh, look, we reduce this risk, right? Like we need to get this risk down as close as we can to zero. And that's like walking in a rainstorm and trying not to get hit with rain. It's like, well, how about if it's raining, don't wear linen, right? Then you have to be a lot less concerned about each individual raindrop, right? It's not going to matter as much if you dress for the weather. And so how do we make our customers, our clients, the people we interact with kind of dress for that weather, understand what that is, and then get to the decision-making piece of cybersecurity, which is, how much money is appropriate for us to spend to have a certain level of comfort? And that comfort means that we can talk about the decisions that we made, and we're okay if we have to justify those decisions before Congress. Right.
Oh,
so that's
well
my
put.
standard. Right.
Yeah.
And we don't
That's
have,
so
if we
well
don't
put.
have that, then, you're not ready. And I think we're doing people a disservice if we're not preparing them to make highly defensible decisions. And that, again, something coming from the FBI, we're supposed to make highly defensible decisions. Miguel, Clarke, why did you do that? Here's the reason why I did that. Well, what should you have done? Given the information I had at the time, nothing else, right? So I'm not afraid of a bad outcome. I just want to be the best version of who I can be and make the best decision with the information that's available to me.
Thank you. That segues really nicely into something I wanted to ask you. Another fun question. Okay, so U.S. recently disclosed foreign actors broadly in the telephone system.
Yes.
Okay, and this leads back to what you're talking about in terms of what is our resilience posture, what is our risk appetite, how are we mitigating against potential attacks, etc.
Yes.
So it's turned into a two-part question because of what you brought up. So the first thing I want to ask is, do you feel that these high-profile incidents, whether on any type of critical infrastructure, are leading the U.S. and therefore probably the democratic world into enforcing levels of standardization on critical infrastructure organizations and holding them to account to ensure that they're protecting said systems for public safety, et cetera? And the first part of the question that I originally wanted to ask you was the FBI, the FBI in 2015 requested that Apple break its encryption to review San Bernardino phone messages. And now in 2024 are encouraging the public to use encrypted chat message solutions because they can't trust the phone network. And I wanted to get your take on where we were, where we've come, and therefore why we may need the standards that I brought up. Thank you for listening to my long-winded question.
Oh man, I love it. So first, let's go with the 2015. Going back to that, yes, the FBI was hoping that the encryption piece would be easier because we couldn't brute force to get in. But there's always a way. And at some point in time, we got the information we needed. That request went away, and I'm not ready to talk about the details in that, but the request went away, the need went away, and then Apple was like, wait a minute, you stopped asking. So the lawful access is a significant problem for law enforcement and will continue to be a significant problem for law enforcement. But I don't think that the remedies are always reduce your level of security. So my view, and it was an unpopular view at the time, but my view is that, hey, if you make a lockable physical container that can't be unlocked except for the key, and you're not interested in doing anything other than just making this lockable container, and then, randomly around the world, like 100 kids lock themselves in these containers and then they die, where should that responsibility go? Right? Like for law enforcement should ask, hey, we need a skeleton key to be able to get into that. And then the business should say, no, we're not going to do that. And so in a free market world, you would make them legally liable for what they had done, and then you put it to a jury. So now it's not the FBI or the government asking, hey, what should we do? It's like, hey, no, the people who buy your products are now going to sue you for tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. And so now you have to decide, what are your principles worth? Because the price of your principles is different when the government's asking you to do something. When it's going to potentially put you out of business, principles become way more malleable at that point in time, right? So let's let the free market have its way as it relates to that, and the company shouldn't get to have it both ways, if that makes sense. So moving forward to where we are right now, absolutely, the technologies that we use for communications are way too trusted, right? Way too trusted. And we should see the technologies that we use as kind of like if you go to let's say that you're going to go to some type of a party somewhere, like picnic outdoor, 4th of July type thing, and you're going to go sit down, and they have these little plastic chairs, right? That you sit down, these plastic lawn chairs that are out there, and they look kind of flimsy. And, if you're happen to be wearing white and you're eating spaghetti, you're like, I don't know about this plastic chair that I'm getting ready to sit in. I'm not super comfortable with that. I might want to check it a little bit before I sit down. Versus, maybe a solid wrought iron park bench that's been cemented down and has been in place for 40 or 50 years and it's immovable, right? You've got more confidence in one mechanism versus the other, and you adjust your behaviors to relate to that. And I say this to say that I assume that everything that I'm saying is being recorded and captured by somebody that I don't want to hear what I'm saying. But that's good and bad. The good part of it is that whoever's recording all these conversations, they have a big data problem. right?
Yes, they certainly do. Yeah.
Yeah, and for this is a great conversation to bring up here with my friends from Microsoft, right? Like understand what big data problems are, right? Like there's a lot of data out there, right? Trying to make meaningful, AI helps, but it's got to be trained, and right, solving the big data problem has been and continues to be a problem, and will until quantum computing comes online in a more meaningful way. So that's good. The other thing is that how do I adjust my communications in such a way that protects my communications from people that I don't want to hear, that I don't want them to see and understand and know. And companies do this all the time, right? If an organization has like a private plane, they might want to fly everybody to a particular location. But you don't want everybody that runs the company, the entire management structure, on one airplane. So you really have to figure out how do you want to meaningfully to spread that risk across that, and you make a meaningful decision that's calculated. And so for my communications, that's the way that I think. If there's something I absolutely need to have, I'll start the communication in one form, move to another form, and then we can move to a third form, right? Just like if somebody had gotten into my Gmail, they would know that I was getting ready to have this meeting here with the three of you, but they wouldn't necessarily automatically have access to the stream. That would take them an additional step, right?
Sure.
And most people are not going to be interested in taking those additional steps unless they
Most
really
people are
interested
lazy.
in me. Yeah. And
Well,
so,
or we just talk about something that's not worth value, right? Like they brought that up in the New York Times report. It's like, okay, well, if this alleged actor, is listening to me rattling off what I need from the grocery store, not as valuable. But one thing the article did point out was that actor had access to folks who were registered as under the protection of the government, or being monitored by the government. And from there, you can derive who is known to the government or not in various circumstances, right?
Yes.
So Yes. The information value is certainly different. And the large population of the United States means that it is a massive big data problem.
Yeah. And we didn't, like the actors, FBI agents, when communicating with sensitive individuals, I don't know. Well, for me, it was something I was always rigorous, right? If I got to protect your identity, I want to be able to go and say I protected your identity. So I know you're in Canada. I was asking you a difficult question, and but as soon as you're like, I don't want to answer that question, I tag me in, right? Like, let's figure out a way to remove that focus from you. And what I talked about was way more interesting than what you talked about.
Absolutely, it was. Yeah, absolutely,
Right?
it was.
And so
that was
now
well
they're
done.
like, okay. And so this is what I mean, that sophistication of the way that we act. And if you notice these behaviors, the security type behaviors, like that little thing, that's what we're not pushing in cybersecurity at all. We're not talking about that level of sophistication to make it that much more difficult for the adversary to get the information that they're looking for, that they want, right? Because they're human beings as well, and they have objectives and things that they want, right? And we can frustrate them into choosing different victims.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, and that builds on my concern. I was wondering what your concern level or the concern level was in public institutions or in critical infrastructure being compromised as often as it is. And you answered the question in a direction I didn't expect, where it's like, well, maybe instead of looking at this from a holistic security, like, we have to make the wall, which we all know is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
We keep our zero trust mindsets.
Yes.
And instead, we make more tactical, nuanced decisions within this system that's been built up for over 100 years. Then we don't have to rip it apart and rebuild it. We just need to work with what we have in a smarter way.
Yes.
And that's ultimately going to be far cheaper than rebuilding the US telephone system, for example,
Yes.
right? So
yes, it's a little bit easier, but it's a difficult way to live, right? Like most people who have children don't want to raise their children in a world where you have to behave with secure behaviors every single day, right? Like, I want a better world for my kids, right? Yes, you do. But that's not reality. That's not the world that we live in. And so one of my favorite things to say is that, you're in the fight until somebody's there to save you, right? So you pick up the phone, you call for help, you're in that fight until help arrives. So you've got to win the fight at least until help arrives. And that's a really difficult standard to have to train people to. Right. I know that you said that you've got a little one running around there, maybe not running yet, but at least there. And that's a difficult standard to think. I've got to train my child to this standard to ensure that he or she stays safe. Right. That, again, it's difficult. but we can either protect people from the threats, or we can prepare them to deal with those threats. And somewhere in between protect and prepare is the right answer. And I think for everyone, it's going to be a balance that's there. But we owe them the ability to effectively protect themselves when faced with the challenges. If that makes sense.
Well, but then again, I think we always talk about security as a team sport, right? We're all in this together, but to be honest, we say that as a mantra to try to get people on board, but because they're not, right? So if we could crowdsource this thing and everybody do their job in security measures, whatever that thing happens to be, whether it's physical security or cyber, whatever, they don't click on the things. If we could get everybody to do their role or their job, we would all be safer. But unfortunately, going back to that lazy term, there's a lot of people, it's not necessarily lazy.
Fatigue.
Some people are,
Fatigue and it's ignorance, but it's not willful ignorance, right? Again, it ties into, I didn't know that this was my job. I assumed I'd be protected by all those folks with those special skills. How would I help drive that forward is probably the mindset that we need to engage with, and then help them to appreciate they can be empowered and enabled to find that pocket to create frustration for those threat actors, if nothing else.
But think about what you just said from that perspective. We are talking about, this is what's required. These are the behaviors that we require from users in order to stay safe. Right. I think it's a valid question for users to come back to security professionals and like, well, why does one click compromise us?
Yes.
Right.
Right.
It's perfectly valid. And so we're willing to have one half of the conversation, but not the second half of the conversation. Right. Yeah. If I click on this thing, the whole company goes bankrupt and we go out of business. It's like, well, why'd you design it that way?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Why'd you design it to the lowest common denominator in such a way that this one thing causes this much of a problem? And so they're like, hey, that's a super valid question that I'd never thought about from before. And this is where we start to bring in the resilience piece of that, right? Like if you get hit with one drop of rain during a rainstorm, right, it's game over, go back home, start all over again, right? Like that, it seems ridiculous. But when you think about the number of cyber threats that are out there, there are probably more cyber threats than raindrops, right? And there's a statistical analysis when you start to think about it, right? Think of all the rain that's happening in the world at any given time, and there are probably more cyber threats. We're talking about what? 9-10 trillion-ish dollars if you're thinking about the entire impact of cybersecurity, the cyber threat, the cybersecurity market as a whole. It's what, like $270 billion a year versus the $10 trillion problem. So that means that the amount of money, capital that it's exiting matches the cybersecurity market every week, right? It's 56 times bigger than the problem, than the solutions that we apply. 40% of those solutions, I think thereabouts, that spending is on education, and then somewhere, I don't know, I can't remember the other part for like tools and services, but that's approximate what we were looking at, right? So it's
so that would be good for a presentation. I'm going to use that one of these days. It's there's more emails with nefarious links sitting in inboxes than there are raindrops.
More likely than not, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a great thing to have Copilot help us figure out, right? Like how many raindrops per,
I'm super curious from like your real world experience. What was your most astounding, incredible turnaround leading an organization to kind of understand where they were right now, and if they had the make or break single click to the one click that would destroy them all? How did you help them appreciate that they needed to adjust their security program?
For some organizations are capable, some organizations are not capable, and a lot of that has to do with business culture. So if you work in a business culture that it's a good business culture, right? Like people feel empowered, right? And they trust one another, and they're not like worried about somebody stabbing them metaphorically in the back, those types of things. Then it's really easy for them, right? They're like, oh, I just need to make this, this safety mindset a part of our business culture, part of our leadership culture. And then that becomes easier. And then it can be led from the top down. So in smaller organizations where you have people who have like previous military background or previous law enforcement background or an affinity for such, that those things tend to be a little bit easier. In most organizations, it's like, okay, well, you're talking about an ideal that we'll never be able to reach. And so your solution isn't practical. It's not a practical solution. Yeah, it is. It's aspirational, right? Living well and eating right. Those are aspirational things too, right? So just because they're hard doesn't mean it's like, you know what, just pass me the bag of candy because, it's too hard to live right. No, there are things or steps that we can move towards. And if you're already going to improve the security culture of the organization, why not take the step to improve the leadership culture of the organization as well? It's going to make you that much more effective. Your people are going to be, less likely to leave the organization. So that turnover means that people maybe end up caring more about the organization. People who have ownership in the organization are more willing to bring the problems. But what we do in security is like, hey, you're going to be a problem. I don't want you to be a problem. And then we provide people a disincentive to bring the problem to us, right? Oh, I clicked on something I shouldn't have clicked. The way that we train, the way that, it's stigmatized. I'm going to keep trying to solve this problem right now before I call for help. That's not what we want, right? We want people to say, I clicked on a thing, get over here, and then I'm going to start trying to solve my problem. That's not a training problem. That's a culture problem.
Very good point. Wow. Yep. Yeah, the carrot and the stick.
It is. Yeah, and if you give people the carrot, they'll go so far above, right? But then you end up having to deal with folks that they're going to bring adversarial type problems to you, right? And then you have to decide whether or not you want agreement or whether or not you want refinement in whatever it is that you're working on, right? Because the market tells you the truth, right? But a lot of the truth that the market tells, you probably already heard in your organization somewhere, and you just didn't think that minority voice, if you will, is really that important, because this is the decision that we have decided to go in so that we can hit our arbitrary number for our arbitrary period of time, right? It's because Simon Sinek talks about finite and infinite games, right? And so if you think about a business and the purpose of a business to stay in business and to continue the game, that's an infinite game. But all of our metrics for success are based on finite games. These are the rules. This is what a company looks. This is what we need to do for profitability. We got to do all these other different kinds of things. So the gap in between those things is where you see the problem. As an organization can narrow that gap, the more profitable, more successful, the more invested people are going to be, and the more likely their employees are to really kind of see cybersecurity or security problems as their own problems to solve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen it adopted well in only one example in my consulting career, and that was at a critical infrastructure power transfer and generation organization.
Yeah.
And the culture there, it was phenomenal to actually see, people living it every day. It wasn't just a tick box exercise, to your point, and people scrutinizing and feeling safe to have those open and vulnerable conversations without fear of retribution. And in fact, being rewarded for doing so. It's a completely 180 mindset that I think a lot of organizations should be looking at. And that's an excellent point, Miguel.
Well, that's interesting because you said critical infrastructure, right? Maybe that has something to do with it as well, depending on what org you're working at. Some orgs, it doesn't seem as critical, so you just really don't care. But I mean, critical infrastructure, come on. You got to hire people Got to hire people that are serious about it. Yeah.
It's a company making floor tile. Are you taking security all that seriously versus, hey, this compromise here could shut down the entire Seattle metro power grid? It's fair. That's fair.
It's a different challenge, but it's still doable, right? I mean, if you have leaders that are there that are like, there's a story of one organization that during the pandemic, everybody took a pay cut so that nobody ended up getting fired. Right. So I don't care what that company makes. if you saw people make those types of sacrifices so that no one person would be unduly impacted, yeah, you probably have some level of investment to that organization that goes beyond, you know, what the company is in business for. And so leadership culture it's an extremely powerful tool that organizations can use for productivity and cybersecurity. But I don't see a lot of conversations about how those two things can be used to complement each other.
Yeah. Folks basically just look at the frameworks, or from a compliance standpoint, I need to have training. How do I outsource this? How do I just deal with it and move on so I can work on other things? It's
yes.
Yeah.
And we recognize it in other areas of our lives, right? It's like, oh, you know, somebody hurt their feelings, and it's like, hey, sorry for what I said, Ray, whatever. And it's like, you know, I really feel like you weren't really sorry. It's like, hey, you said you wanted an apology. Here's your apology. I'm compliant, right? Like the relationship doesn't really grow as a result of that, right? Like it's, you know, we're really trying to figure out what are the behaviors that need to change as a result of this infraction, and then leaning into what those things are. But there's not a demand to behave like that. And the people who are really kind of going through the compliance piece, they're not always asking for the behavioral change to go along with that. And it's very much like driving. You end up going where you look, right? There's a sympathetic reaction when you start to focus on the rules as opposed to the behaviors. Like you drive towards, your body is inclined to move you towards the thing that you're looking at.
And
Yes,
Miguel's got the best.
My wife is almost hit some bushes sometimes.
Maybe they were really interesting bushes, Rod.
Yeah, it's a pretty bush.
She's not here to defend herself, by the way.
She'll hear this later. She always listens to the show, and so I always like to mention her at least in some way.
Wonderful.
She's great. She's a great driver, though. Huh?
She's a wonderful woman, Rod. Why are you like?
Rod's wife is an amazing driver, just for the record.
I said that. Yeah, she is. Yeah. She is. She's a good driver.
Miguel, do you? Okay, so on the carrot and the stick theme.
Yes.
Hopefully you knew that we were here till 4:30.
I was thinking it would be steak instead of a carrot, but because of the whole carnivore thing, but yeah.
Fine. Do you see? So that's fine in a training program sense internally. Do you envision any future where the lack of protection mechanisms at an organization, probably something that services the public, would lead to arrests of leadership due to lack of compliance, or due to a significant negative impact on society? Okay,
I don't think so. Arrest, no. But the government will still sue you. Yes. Yeah, I think that's going to happen. We've seen that I think there was some sanctions or something. SEC had kind of like handed out some fines, in the millions and millions of dollars. There's kind of like the public embarrassment piece, right? Reputational damage, if you will. None of us feel like United Health Group was the best place to have our coverage, our health insurance coverage last year in the spring, right? Like that's not the feeling that we had. Whether or not it was, I can't speak to that, but none of us, it didn't pass the eye test that they were doing everything that they could. First thing for me was them not knowing how long it was going to take for them to bring the systems back up online. And I think that's the biggest area where we have an opportunity for change, right? That should be the expectation. Right. It should be the expectation. Hey, when do we get back up online? What's that going to take? And then the right answer for these organizations is, hey, the last time we ran these simulations was similar, it took this much time. Right. And I think what you will see is you're going to see the government starting, at least the U.S. government starting to move more towards the expectation that you're going to know. Right.
Nice.
And
like
when you think about, like, say, cybersecurity insurance spending, what's the appropriate amount of coverage and how do you arrive at that? So I don't need the answer. I want to make sure that you went through the most rigorous process to get to that answer. That's how you have highly defensible decisions. We decided, right? At a certain point in time, you can spend more money in insuring a thing than the thing is worth. Right. Or that the market, in order for you to stay competitive in the market, maybe you can't afford to do a particular, to fully secure. But how the board of directors and executive leadership, how we understand that threat, how they understand that threat, and how they decided to allocate resources to address that threat, or to ensure the maximum amount of resilience given their understanding of the threat and their own vulnerabilities. I think that's going to become the standard in the next couple of years. And the incoming administration has an opportunity to kind of to make that the thing, that the ongoing impact of the decisions that they made, right? Like our administration made this change, and they have the opportunity to hang their hats on that and to make that meaningful change for generations to come, or at least administrations to come.
I hope we see that too. That's great transparency and information for the end user / consumer of whatever the service may be to ultimately make the decision if they want to store health records in X or Y, or live in a city that's resilient enough to withstand disaster A versus disaster B. 100% agree with you.
And then you let the market decide, hey, did you do everything that was appropriate? And none of us feel like, when we hear about a breach and we're a customer, we never feel like that organization did everything that they could have done and everything that they should have done. Like, we never feel like that. So how do we have a post-breach conversation pre-breach? And I think that's what cybersecurity should be about, is having a post-breach conversation, right? Metaphorically, your breach is going to happen on Friday. So what do our conversations on Monday and Tuesday look like, right? So when we get to Friday, because we know Friday is coming, that Friday is coming, what do you want to be able to say confidently to to your investors, to the board of directors, to Congress, right, on the world stage? What kind of a confident statement do you want to make, right? And anytime we've had to perform for somebody or in front of an audience, most of us practice, right? That's what most of us are going to do, right? These singers, oh yeah, we're rehearsing, right? If not practice, it's a rehearsal. Hey, I'm getting ready to perform. I want the rehearsal. And so if things don't go well, it makes you wonder, it's like, what was your rehearsal like? And was there anybody there who told you you're not doing a good job, right? Like don't sing the national anthem at this sporting event, right? It's going to be an embarrassment for you.
Some people are good at improv, Miguel. Some people are not. So that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not changing
Okay.
all these things are changing. Like, Rod is an ongoing question, and how the post, like, all these things are changing. I'm staying the same. I don't know how I feel about that.
That's consistency. Okay. I'm chaotic runtime. This is what it is. Okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah. We always have to adapt, right? That's the way security is, though. I mean, it changes constantly because you talk about consistency and the consistent message. I mean, that's one thing.
Core fundamentals.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you do have to adapt. Not necessarily the message, but the way that message
is executed.
Is handled and communicated and executed as well. So I think that's good. Thank you so much, Miguel, for stopping by again today. And I will correct myself for the third time.
For the third time, yes. I was getting ready.
Very nice.
I caught myself there.
I don't feel like I had enough questions from Rod, though. I think that Rod is holding back at least one or two back there. Anybody that knows Rod a little bit knows. Look at the smile.
You got to realize, I could talk forever. People know that. And sometimes I have to kind of check myself so everybody else can participate. Otherwise, for
the fourth episode, it'll just be Rod nonstop, Miguel.
Just Rod the whole time.
Yeah.
I'll interrupt everything you're saying.
Fine. But yeah, thank you so much, Miguel. Thank you so much to our listeners and our live viewers. For our listeners, if you've never attended a show live, you absolutely should. There's a lot of questions that come in, a lot of comments and camaraderie, even with our audience in the chat, which is awesome. We love our audience, which kind of tends to be a pretty large audience. We have 250 live audience members every week. So if you're not part of that, it's okay if you can't. But if you ever have the opportunity, please do join us. We would absolutely appreciate seeing you. Once again, Miguel, thank you so much for coming on. And again, I will ask more questions next time because you bring up a lot of things. I was kind of thinking at one point where we were talking about the flooring company, you may have come up with an allegory about linoleum. I was expecting that to really come through, but
The
think
tiling.
on that for next time, because I will ask that question.
Yeah. And for the record, nothing against flooring companies. Miguel, if people want to get a hold of you for anything, do you respond to LinkedIn?
I do
messages that
respond to LinkedIn. Yes. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to have the,
Oh,
the
wow.
conversation,
Holy crap.
the discussion.
Our good buddy and the audience member, Steven, lives in Santa Monica next to Palisades. A lot of thoughts and prayers to those people with the fires out in California. That's horrible. Horrible.
These fires are leading to more and more resilience conversations. Canada also had a bad episode recently. And I think, it's an important conversation. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with what's going to continue to happen instead of trying to prevent what's going to continue to happen. So
it's the antidote to the cybercrime problem, right? Resilience is. It is. Once we change the mindset, we're going to completely change the environment.
We have to. We absolutely have to. Those people, we could go into it, but yeah, it absolutely has to change. Whether that's a vote or just literally bearing down and reassessing literally everything. I don't care. It has to. But again, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. We will be back next week. Miguel, I hope you're in the audience next week. And if you are, we might just surprise you and bring you on so I can ask you questions.
Pressure.
You know what? I think I need to make sure that I put this in my calendar for every week.
Okay.
Oh, what a great idea, Miguel. Be like Miguel, listeners and viewers.
Be like Miguel. If there's anything you learn from this episode, be like Miguel.